When I walk onto a property for a consultancy, one of the first things I'm looking for is a congruency in the goals that my clients have stated and the biological potential of the property. So if, for example, if my clients state that they're vegan and they live in a climate like this, which has got 100 frost-free days, you know, there's a lack of congruency there because you're not going to be able to grow all of the vegan foods. So let me back up a second. Let's say that they're vegan and they want to be 100% self-sufficient with their food. In a climate like this, it's very hard to do that because you've got 100 frost-free days to grow food for 365 days of the year. And we have pretty cold nighttime temperatures. And so if veganism is a really important goal set for you, then you need to move to an ecosystem that is going to support that goal, which is Hawaii or Central America or India. And so I'm looking for a congruency of goals, like what do my clients want and what does the property want, and is there an intersection point there? Another thing that I'm looking for, I want to find the best place on the property and I want to find the worst place on the property. So I want to find the place that's most intact, where the soil cycle, the nutrient cycle, the plant cycle is intact. And I want to look at what the soils look like a quick, you know, uncovering of the mulch layer, because typically these systems that are intact are going to be three-dimensional. Like I look at a lawn, it's just a two-dimensional space for me. But when I look at trees or shrubs, nature grows in 3 dimensions. And so where we have a fully developed ecology, or at least more developed than a 2-dimensional space, it's always the same. It doesn't matter whether you're in Jordan or in British Columbia or in Alberta. When the ecosystem is further along in succession, the places that are most intact always have 3 dimensions. They have more biodiversity. We have a scientific term for that, which is leaf area index. So it's the amount of surface area of leaves per unit area of earth. So when we go up 3 dimensions, that LFA, that leaf area index, goes up. As you get more surface area per unit area of earth, you have a more efficient solar collector, which means that more water is being pulled out of the ground, more sugars are being produced as a process of photosynthesis, and more of those sugars are getting injected into the soil, which is feeding the soil microbiology. As carbon goes up, the ability for the soil to hold moisture increases. A 1% increase in soil moisture increases the water holding capacity of a hectare of land by 144,000 liters. So I want to find that place that is closest to representing what the ecosystem could become. It's kind of what in permaculture we call it our zone 5. And then I want to look at the worst place, and I want to look at the difference between the two. And there's so much to learn between those two systems. Like I was on a property in BC last year, and we did this exact thing. And we found the best place, and it was this little tuft of trees in the middle of this super arid field. And then the worst place, there was no vegetation growing on it. It was eroded. Clearly the soils were getting really hot during the day. There were clumps of grass, but they were pretty far apart. So it's called pedestaling when you've got this, that's a form of erosion basically. And sure enough, I started laughing hysterically when I saw this. Because we're like, well, why did this tuft of trees just show up randomly in this arid field? And like, what makes this different than over there? And we rummaged around in this little kind of bush to, you know, you'd think of it as scrub, like this useless piece of scrub. That's what a farmer would refer to it as. And sure enough, what do we find but a small little mound that some human placed there probably 100 years ago. It was probably a watering hole for cattle. That intercepted an old ephemeral drainage. And so this little tiny mound that was probably even dug there with hand shovels, like not even an earth machine, was slowing enough water on an annual basis to change the hydrology underneath that facilitated this piece of land to go from crappy, arid, pedestaled land over here to this lush little, and I don't like the word scrub because it automatically connotates this kind of useless piece of land, but it was actually the most biodiverse place on the property. All because of a little tiny speed bump, a little suture in the landscape. And so that was such an important clue, because we were contemplating on that property putting in multiple kilometers of swales, and we're thinking, is this actually going to work? Is this going to do anything? Like, how do I justify to my client that we should go and spend $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 putting in these swales? Like, what's our justification? And it's like, it's right there. It's like, somebody 100 years ago did this, and look at what happened when they walked away. It just got better. The soils were chocolate brown compared to the subsoils that were just blowing away in the dust. And so when you have the ability to contrast those two systems, it gives you all sorts of clues. And this system the story that I just told, we determined very quickly that the weak link on this property was water infiltration. And so if we could fix the water cycle, which is usually the case on these degraded properties, we can then fix the plant cycle. The plant cycle then fixes the soil cycle, which increases soil carbon, which increases the water cycle, and you get this upward spiral going up. So you're looking for clues, and I'm sure sometimes when I'm walking around this property, aimlessly, my staff probably are thinking, like, why doesn't Rob spend more time designing stuff on his computer? He talks about all the design that you need to do before you do implementation. And it's because I'm looking for those clues. I'm designing always in my head. I don't necessarily need a computer to be designing. I'm looking at all of my spaces and trying to understand what fits where based on all sorts of constraints and considerations. What wants water, what doesn't want water, what needs sun, what doesn't need sun, what needs to be close to our center of energy, what can be further away. Right now, the issue we're having is we have too many materials and they're choking up our system, and so we had to go build a storage yard. It was the last thing on my mind, but all of a sudden when a system is oversupplied with energy, it goes into chaos. We're seriously in chaos right now, and so we have to build a storage yard to get out of chaos, and in doing that created all sorts of other opportunities. And so you'll do your best to design these systems as a result of these observations that you make, but then at some point you just have to start. You have to do something. And as a result of doing it, new information comes into the system. And so just the other day I was looking at building a pond on our property, and so we were trying to explore whether or not it would hold. And to my knowledge, I mean, the material that we have here is pretty silty and sandy. I don't think it would hold. But my earth mover is saying, well, maybe I think it will hold, actually, because I've dug some ponds in this material around here before. New piece of information. It's like, okay, well, how do we test that hypothesis? He's like, well, let's dig a hole up there and fill it up with water. So we did, and it did hold fairly well. But as a result of doing that and building this new storage yard, new insights actually started to come. And so when you start kind of doing stuff as well, your design can't be rigid. It has to be flexible enough that it can change so that you can adapt to that new piece of information. So that was a really long-winded way of telling you about what I look at on a piece of property. But the first two things are the goal set of my client and what the property actually wants to be and what's capable of becoming, and looking at the best and the worst of the property to try and understand what the weak link is. So if there's one thing that you could change on that property to improve the property's well-being, because the well-being of the property is going to dictate the well-being of the people that are managing it, you want to understand what that lead domino is. What's that one thing that you could do on that property? In this case, the story I gave in this example was water, but what's the one thing that you can do to move that system further up in succession? And then from there, things start to fractal out and they start to appear in front of you. And I know that sounds really woo-woo, but if you're looking for a process on how to go through that diagnosis, check out our new book, Building Your Permaculture Property, because we detail out the methodical steps that we go through when we're looking at a property. And I can tell you that once you get good at this, you don't follow step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They all happen simultaneously. But when you're learning it, you need a stepwise approach so that you can kind of master one step at a time before you can take all the steps concurrently into your mind. And right now, like, I know my goal set and I understand what this property can be, and so I'm constantly cycling through those things in my head, trying to look for new opportunities all the time. And you get better at it. It just takes practice.